welcome to the Bio-181 Tutoring Center videos. Today we're going to be talking about the nutrient cycles. So as we were talking about energy and how it flows through a system, we know that we have a constant input of energy from the sun to our overall biosphere or entire Earth's ecosystem. However, with nutrients that's not the case, because generally when we refer to Earth we consider it a closed system so that we have energy coming in and out, but we don't have matter coming in and out. And so the occasional meteorite that will come down on Earth or the occasional other things that will be released into space, that's really the only matter that we're going to be exchanging. So in order to keep things running, we have to have a system in which we can cycle this matter and these nutrients and these chemicals through so that we can continue using them for the processes that we need. So the way that we do this, the way that we cycle these nutrients is using both biological and abiotic type processes. So we usually call these biogeochemical cycles because the way in which we do them is we use some biological processes, some geological processes, and some chemical processes so we can regenerate them. So we're going to talk about four today. I'm going to focus on a couple things. First, I'm going to focus on why we need this certain nutrients, and then I'm going to talk about the form that most biological things can take it in, and then the main reservoir where this nutrients is found, and then kind of the process of how we get it from that main reservoir into these biological organisms. So we're going to start off with the water cycle. As we all know, water is essential for life. Every living thing relies on water. And the main form that living things can take it up in is liquid. There's a few organisms that can take up gaseous water and use it, but for the most part we need liquid water. So that's kind of an example of even if in really cold places or glaciers or stuff we have all that water there, but it's frozen so plants can't uptake it. And our main reservoir for water on Earth is the ocean. It has about 97% of the water. The other reservoir for water can be glaciers, lakes, groundwater, and things like that. And so you probably already kind of know how the water cycle works. You should have learned it probably in like 5th grade, but we'll just review it quickly. So what we have, there's the three main steps: precipitation, evaporation, and condensation. So we have evaporation of ocean water, or from the land, or we can have evapotranspiration from plants, so water being evaporated off of plants. That water is in a gaseous form. It will then condense back into a liquid form to form these clouds, and then it will precipitate back down on Earth. So that's pretty straightforward, not too difficult. The next one I want to touch on is the carbon cycle. Carbon is important because it is essential for all organic molecules. If you remember back to the Bio-180 days, every single functional group that we looked at contained carbon, and so every single macromolecule we looked at contained carbon, and so without carbon we can't have these organic molecules that are essential for life. The main reservoir of carbon is actually in rocks and sediments, but the main form that biological organisms can uptake is actually in the form of CO2. So we have to have a way to kind of get that carbon out of the rocks and sediments and somehow kind of change it to CO2, and then different organisms can uptake it. So what happens is, the first part of it's kind of pretty, should be familiar with you. We have plants that are going to intake CO2. They're going to use that CO2 to make sugars by photosynthesis, and then they're going to break down those sugars in respiration, or some other consumer is going to consume the plant and get those sugars, and then they'll break them down themselves, and then they'll release CO2 back into the atmosphere. But one way that we get this rocks and sediment, the CO2 from there, is by burning fossil fuels. So as we burn fossil fuels, we release CO2 back into the atmosphere. And so you should be familiar with this idea as well, because we talk a lot about it when it comes to global warming. So we can burn those fossil fuels, or we can dissolve certain of the chemicals contained within these rocks and get the CO2 out that way, or the carbon out that way, and then different things within the ocean can use it. So we have also phytoplankton. They're a major photosynthetic prokaryote that donates a lot of CO2 to our atmosphere. The next one is nitrogen. Nitrogen is important It's a major component of amino acids, which make up proteins, which do a lot of important functions for our body. We can't function without proteins. And then also nucleic acids, which are our DNA, our genetic code. So those are both really important for living things. The main reservoir of nitrogen is in the atmosphere. About 80% of our atmosphere is actually made up of nitrogen. And then there's also some in rocks and sediment and things like that. But we'll focus on the atmosphere. But the main form that plants can uptake or use to make their organic forms of nitrogen is ammonium and nitrate, so NH4 plus and NO3 minus. Bacteria can also uptake nitrite, NO2 minus. However, the nitrogen that is formed in the atmosphere is N2, and so it has this triple bond. So in order to get it, we have to break that triple bond, and that can be extremely difficult for most living things. So we have special bacteria that do it, because there's kind of really two ways to break this. One is lightning, but that's not going to happen enough to be able to support life. So what we have is this nitrogen fixation. So we have certain bacteria that will fix nitrogen from this N2 form to other forms such as ammonium and nitrite. And so then there's a couple other type of processes that can go on that can transfer this nitrogen, and all of them involve different bacteria. And so this is why bacteria are so important, or different microorganisms or prokaryotes are important for life, is because of this recycling of nitrogen. And other things as well, but this is the main one. So as we said, nitrogen fixation is taking N2 and converting it into some of these other forms. Ammonification is taking organic forms of nitrogen from living things that have now died, so decomposers do this, and they change this organic form into ammonia, so that's why it's called ammonification. And then nitrification is taking ammonium, and changing it into nitrate, so that's why it's called nitrification. And then assimilation is just when plants take these forms of nitrogen that they can use, such as ammonium or nitrate, and then they use them for whatever process they need, and they change into the organic forms. And then so animals will take in plants so that they can get the organic forms of nitrogen that they need. And then lastly, we have denitrification, which is other prokaryotes that will use NO3 minus instead of oxygen in cellular respiration, and so they'll release N2 as a byproduct, and then we'll be able to restore the N2 back into the atmosphere. So that's how we kind of go through this entire cycle of nitrogen. The last one is phosphorus. So phosphorus is important because it makes up nucleic acids, phospholipids, and ATP. So without this, again, we couldn't do a lot of our biological processes. Something interesting to note about phosphorus is that it is going to be more localized. All three of these other ones, they can travel kind of throughout the entire globe, because nitrogen and carbon can be found in the atmosphere, and so they're going to be cycling that way. And water with like clouds and weather traveling. So we're going to have kind of global cycling of water, nitrogen, carbon. But phosphorus, not a lot of it is contained in the atmosphere, so it's going to kind of be more localized in its general region. And so the main reservoir for phosphorus is in sedimentary rocks. And the main form that living things need in order to turn it into these other forms that they need is phosphate, or PO4 3-. And so kind of the process that happens is we have sediment that can be geologically uplifted, and then weathering and runoff occurs, and so we're able to get that into the oceans or things. And then we also can have phosphate in soil that could be leached into the water. And so we can have phosphate being uptaken by plants from the soil, and then just different living organisms consuming those plants and getting the phosphate that way. And then when they die, phosphate is kind of put back into the soil. Or we can have different aquatic things like plankton that uptake this dissolved phosphate, and then when they're decomposed and after they die, it can be put back in. And so again, this is kind of going to be more localized. So that's going to be really it for today. I hope it was helpful. I hope you understand these biogeochemical cycles a little bit better. Just again, make sure you focus on the main reservoir for each of these nutrients, why they're important, and the forms that are needed for biological things to uptake. As far as kind of new things, just really make sure you know all of these different kind of terms of what fixation does, nitrification, ammonification, and denitrification. As long as you got that, you'll be good for any test or homework assignment. Thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.